Thank you all for being here. I want to kick things off. Today is really meant to be a follow-up to a special edition colleague circle we had a few weeks ago where Liz Shapiro from DECD generously joined us to talk a little bit about the reopening guidelines from the state of Connecticut. Now that many organizations around Connecticut are beginning to reopen, we wanted to bring together folks again to give you an opportunity to think a little bit with one another about how that process is going for you so far. So we brought together a few people from CLHO member organizations around the state, different kinds of organizations of different sizes, to talk a little bit about how the process is going for them, how they approached it, and how things are going. Just kind of give us a status report. We have with us three people today. We have Bob Burns, who's the executive director of the Mattatuck Museum in Waterbury. We have Donna Baron, who's the executive director of the Lebanon Historical Society in Lebanon, Connecticut. And we have Cam Farlow, who's the treasurer at the Leffingwell House Museum, Society of Founders of Norwich in Norwich, Connecticut. And they're going to speak in that order. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Bob to share a little bit about how the Mattatuck has approached reopening and how things are going for them. Bob?
Okay, thank you so much, Ambrose, and thank you all for joining us here today. For those of you that don't know, the Mattatuck Museum is currently under construction and has been since, it'll be a year and a half now. So we are currently housed in a historic house here in Waterbury known as Rose Hill. So we've gone back to our roots. We're more of a historical society than we have been for the last 100 or so years. We closed on March 17th and we reopened officially on June 22nd. Reopening for us means timed entries, only allowing 10 people into the building. I got to kneel on the floor and tape down lots of arrows and 6-foot spacings with masking tape or gaffer's tape all over the building. We acquired a great deal of plexiglass and cleaners and gloves and face shields and latex gloves and all sorts of wipes and things, constantly cleaning all the time. We reopened on that Monday the 22nd, and in the first week we saw, I think, 16 people spread over 2 days came to visit us. And the second week we saw, I think, 4 or 5 people. And this week we've seen 6 people. They've all come as couples, and they've had 40 minutes on their own on the first floor of the building. And then when they leave, we clean vigorously. We've made one restroom available on the first floor for our visitors, but once it's been used by one person in the group, it's closed until it's cleaned. So that's sort of been limited. Next week, we were supposed to begin 3 weeks of summer youth art. We don't use the word camp, but it's day camp, basically. However, we've had to quickly pivot because our usual people who take advantage of this have decided that they didn't want to send their kids away to camp this year, and no newcomers have showed up, and so we have pivoted just today, so that next week we won't be offering any programs, but for the 3 weeks following, we're actually going to be providing our program in a modified format for kids that are at day camp at the YMCA next door. So right now there's about, I think, 60 or 70 kids in that program. So we'll be seeing them in groups of 5 or 6 every day for those 3 weeks for a couple of hours each day, so that we can continue to provide this program. And it's actually really helping them out because they don't seem to have a lot of things to do with the kids, except they all get to swim for an hour a day. So it's actually, it's a great sort of lemonade story for us. We did poll all of our members before we reopened, and most of them told us that it would be late summer before they would be coming back to visit us. So that's turned out to be true. Some of them told us that they won't be coming back until there's a vaccine, and that's not surprising because I'm sure for most of you, a majority of your members and supporters are people in high-risk categories, as are ours. We have seen, of those people that have visited us, many of them have been people who are visiting relatives or coming to Connecticut for a visit. So they've added us, finding that we're one of the few things in the area that they can come and visit. So that's been really nice. Our staff is really sort of working at a little bit less than 50% of us on site every day, and the rest are working remotely. We were prepared for working remotely because the snow impacts us a lot in the wintertime, so we were already set up for all that, so we didn't actually have a big learning curve on the remote working thing. We did learn how to use Teams, which most of you don't know me well enough to know that I'm a complete and utter Luddite, so it's surprising that I can even be on this Zoom call with you, but people helped me do that. But I do understand Teams now, and it's been sort of terrific way for us to work remotely, and now that half of us are back and the rest are there, it's a sort of like nice add-on to be able to communicate so immediately with your colleagues who are either right around the corner or in their homes. This is not a fashion statement. This is how I go through the building. If I leave my office, I have my mask on, and when I come back to my office, I can take it off. And honestly, I have like 800 masks now because my sister made them for me, and we have Mattatuck Museum masks if anyone's interested. They're really nice. But I find that having a bandana around my neck all the time makes life a little bit easier for moving around quickly. So that's sort of my experience. We're all healthy. That's the thing I like to start with. All of my staff are healthy and safe and being very good citizens in doing everything that we're asked to do right. And so that is a sort of great thing for all of us. So that's my story.
Thank you so much, Bob.
Sure.
Next, I want to hand things over to Donna Baron from Lebanon Historical Society. Donna, take it away.
Thank you. But first I have to make a correction. I am museum director at the Lebanon Historical Society.
Apologies.
And work cooperatively with my board, which is also the Historical Society board. We also closed down on March 17th, have been working until sometime in early June, mostly remotely with me coming in twice a week to do a security check. We have a modern museum building and 3 historic buildings that are normally open to the public, and 2 pieces of property in different locations adjacent to the Lebanon Green. We are not at this point reopened. We are, however, working 5 days a week with our full staff of 3 here in the museum building. We began planning for reopening for our board's June meeting, working with the state's guidelines, and presented a draft plan to the board, and the board said, let's talk about this some more, and waited and brought it up again at the July meeting. The written plan was adopted then with a target date of reopening to the public in late August, maybe. In the meanwhile, when we closed, we literally were a quarter of a way into an exhibit installation. We can't open until we get that installed, and we need to get volunteers in to do the installation. And like all of you, our volunteers are old enough to be in one of those high-risk groups. So we're individually talking with folks and asking if they're comfortable coming in and starting to give us a hand. Projects that are going on outside are a lot easier for us to deal with. We have a great deal of outside space, and we're working on exterior exhibits, which is something we've never done before, which hopefully in another couple of weeks those will be up. We're starting to create videos, again, something we've never done before, but we're not looking at opening the historic buildings this year. And while we have some of them with videos available, others we don't. And without Eastern Connecticut State University in session, we don't have access to the students who helped us with the ones we've done before. So we're on a learning curve about that. Generally speaking, even with just a few of us here, we're doing daily cleanings, and we have the thermometers and the masks and the gloves that everybody is requiring. We've probably had the same challenges in getting products, particularly cleaning products, that everybody else has. We have 2 public restrooms, so we will be able to handle our relatively low visitation once it opens. We have had our first visitor arrive at the door and stand there saying, "But you must be open." And sort of, why? She wanted to come in and bring her grandchildren into our hands-on room, which is not something we will be reopening in a hands-on format when we do reopen. One of the things when we came back to work that we did is we have cleaned and put away all of the interactive materials that we normally have out. So when we open later this year, as I anticipate we will, we're not going to be doing that side of our programming and probably won't again until we're sure that it's entirely safe to do that, which will mean that we will have a second spring season impacted with school groups, because these are materials we use extensively with school programming. So that's pretty much where we are at this point.
Thank you very much, Donna, and sorry for introducing you improperly. Thanks for correcting.
Oh, no, it's an easy mistake.
Last, we have with us Cam Farlow, who is with the Leffingwell House Museum. Cam, you want to take it away?
I'm with the Leffingwell House Museum in Norwich, and I wear many hats. One of them is the treasurer, the other one is the program. And when all this started back in April, we obviously were devastated because our entire year of programming got canceled instantly. And so we started thinking about what could we do. All of our programs and events are based on our collections, we based our event on Norwich history and the collections that we have that support it, which is the great thing to do. But if you can't show your collections, what are you going to do with them? Take them outside? I don't think so. And so we started thinking about it. And when the governor said, gee, restaurants can open outside, and so can zoos and outdoor museums, we figured, well, gee, we have grounds. Why not become an outdoor museum? And since we are trying to demonstrate and show history, we thought we'd invite many of the living history reenactors that we're familiar with and see if they would like to come and join us for an afternoon and see how it worked. And so on June 20th, we had probably 6 different groups of reenactors on the grounds. We roped it off and tied it off and had all kinds of masks and everything else. Everyone had to wear a mask, had their hands sanitized, they had to sign in so we could check to make sure in case someone got sick, we could call them up. And we did all these, all this crazy stuff. And it worked out very well. The reenactors were thrilled to be able to show history to everyone. And we found that it worked well. It's, it takes a bit of setup. It's kind of interesting with little squares on the grass and arrows. And we put signage saying, wear your mask, sanitize your hands, stay 6 feet apart. But everyone worked out very well and was very good about it, which we were really happy. And we had about 55 people, and they kind of staggered all the way through the day, and no one was overcrowded. And so we figured this is going to work. So we did it again on the 4th. We took our annual Be Revolutionary event outside, and we had a presentation in the garden 12 feet away from everybody else with loudspeakers, pointing at the yard because everybody brought their lawn chairs and sat on the hill. And again, we had a bunch of reenactors, British soldiers. You could enlist in the militia. We had a cannon to start it off, the usual. And it was fun. It was very good. 2 newspapers came and gave us good coverage and told everybody how good we were about having, masks and being careful with COVID. And again, we had a successful day. We had over 100 people. We only had one little dicey moment. Is that a hand there, Liz? Oh, okay. Thank you.
Wow.
And so we were quite pleased. So what we figured we can continue to do is we can hold our events right through the fall, and we can keep them outside. We can have a speaker because we have a sound system that we can use, and they can talk in the garden without a mask so people can hear them, but they're 12 feet away. And people can either sit on the lawn or sit inside the fence, and we just have to be careful and judicious how we arrange people in the space. But it sort of worked out. So we've sort of rethought ourselves at this point in time, because like everyone knows, small house museums do not have endowments usually, and we usually have no income. And so it's nice to occasionally get a little something coming in, and it's working very well for us. And so at this point, I would say we feel very positive about the future, and we're comfortable with it. So that's what I have to say.
Great, thank you all so much. I want to open things up to a conversation from the group. I just want to add that we also have Liz Shapiro here with us again from DECD, and she's prepared to answer any questions that may come up about the state's guidelines or any other questions you may not have had a chance to ask in our previous colleague circle on reopening. And just to, so if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to throw it in the chat. You can raise your hand or start your video and speak. I can call on you. I'd be happy to do that. If you'd like to share your own experiences at your organization or anything that you think is relevant to this conversation, please just let me know and we'll get you in the queue. As we're waiting to hear from people, I was just hoping I could ask our panelists to say a little bit about their experiences so far. Has there been much conflict either within the organization or with the public? Have you experienced any challenges other than those that you may have spoken about already in the reopening process, or have you found that there's generally a sort of consensus about what your organization should be doing at this moment in time?
I think for us, we were anticipating some pushback on our requirement of masks, but that hasn't happened yet. Everyone has shown up with a mask, prepared to be masked. I mean, we say it everywhere, and willingly wearing their masks as they've come through. So that was our and, you know, maybe when more people start coming in August and September, we might see a little bit of that. But so far, everyone has been very helpful in being good visitors and arriving on time and with their mask ready. So
we only had one issue with one gentleman, and he came and said it was his constitutional right not to wear a mask. So we offered him a face shield. He said it's his right not to wear one. And so we said it was our right to say he got to leave and get in his car and go away. And so he did. And you know, all of us are, just about everyone at our museum is over 65. And so we have to be careful. Everyone is doing what they're comfortable with and not over, you know, if you're comfortable not being too close, then they watch the parking lot. If they're, you know, and we sort of worked it out that way where everyone's doing what they feel good about doing. So it's working fairly well. The museum is only open for appointments. We're not doing any general tours at this time, and we don't plan to in the near future.
And since we're not open, I haven't been able to observe any of that kind of situation yet.
The woman who came to your door with her children, was she wearing a mask?
No.
Okay, just curious. We have a question from Anne that I think Liz may be able to speak to about ventilation and what improvements might be needed in that regard to make a space safer for visitors.
Sure, Amris. So really a lot of this indoor safety especially has to do with tools in the toolbox. And so what I've been told by public health officials is that you need to think of all of the things that we do as the things that you can do to make your spaces safer. So you can make sure that your visitors' employees sanitize and wash their hands, wear masks, maintain social distancing, all the protocols that we're used to. But one of the best ways to make indoor spaces much more safe is by increasing ventilation. And I know, because I worked for years and years and years in a historic house museum, that the idea of increasing ventilation it's extremely fraught, because generally speaking, we're trying to keep our historic buildings sort of as controlled an environment as possible. So now I'm going to go and tell you a whole other bunch of things, which is going to have to sort of reset the way that you think, which I think has been extremely challenging for me as a practitioner, but also I know for all of you. So opening doors and having exchange of indoor and outdoor air is really, really important. So I understand that if you are running air conditioners inside your space, if you're lucky enough to have climate control, that looks a little different, and I'll speak to that. But if you don't have climate control in your historic building, then consider opening the doors, consider fans, but fans inside out. So fans that are blowing, that are sort of blowing the air out of the building rather than blowing the air into the building. If you can open windows and put box fans in them, you would put them in backwards, or the ones that are designed to be the, you know, the sort of low and long ones that you put in a window anyway, put them on exhaust. So what they're doing is pulling air out, because air will come in if it is being removed. That's just the nature of ventilation. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but that is going to increase the humidity and it's going to wreak havoc and we're not going to be comfortable. And what are you telling me to do? So I totally understand that fear. So just some of the things that I'm going to just throw out to you to play devil's advocate on that topic is, number one, how many of you are maintaining a relative humidity that you're measuring every day, especially during the summer season already? So if you're not measuring that, then you don't really know what's happening in your house anyway. So I'm going to suggest that maybe it's already bad, and maybe ventilation could actually make it better. And that has been told to me for years and years and years and years. So, so don't assume it's horrible until you have some idea of what's actually happening in your space. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we know that there are things in our collection that are much more subject to changes in relative humidity. And really what we're talking about here is relative humidity. It's not temperature. So we want our visitors to be comfortable, but you know, we're museums. We really want our objects to be the most comfortable and the most safe. So there's some possibilities for your objects. So if you can increase the ventilation in your indoor spaces, take the most susceptible objects and take them off display where your people are going to be. Put them in their own space. If they're really, really susceptible and very, very important to your collection, consider seeing if you can establish a loan to another organization where maybe they can just store something for the time that you're going to be open, or think about fine arts storage. And there's a lot of that is really good around Connecticut. So I think we're in a situation right now where organizations really want to be helpful to each other as much as humanly possible. And so the normal barriers that we sometimes feel like tiny organizations, oh, we would never approach large organizations, don't feel that way. This is the time where we are all in a bad situation together. I've never seen people be collaborative and kind to each other and want to be helpful as I have now. Now, if you do have a facility where you have an HVAC system, a lot of it is about talking to your HVAC, the people who maintain your HVAC system, and there's possibilities of increasing the filters. Sometimes all HVAC systems don't like to work with all filters, so you really need to consult a professional, but a lot of it is about filtration and exchange rates. So those would be the two things that you would ask your HVAC specialist about. So I hope that helps.
I had a question. We have a forced hot air system off our furnace, which we can circulate air around the house, and it goes through filters. Would that be acceptable to use if we are open and have some people inside at any point in time? I mean, we're not having large groups, but we'd have, small groups at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I'm not an expert on interior systems, but anything that's going to increase air movement. So if you use that and you threw some fans in, I mean, it's sort of, what's the cost? Like the real dollars and cents cost when you put on that system? Is it something that you can absorb? Is it worth it? So I think a lot of it is thinking through, but anything you can do, just like moving air, because right now, the more we find out about COVID is that the disease spreads, it's more airborne than we thought. And the idea is get it out, get it out, and don't give it a chance to be stationary anywhere. If it's hanging in the air, then it's much more likely you're gonna have pockets of people getting sick. I'm gonna also just say, if you have questions and wanna know more about this topic, there have been 3 science-based reopening webinars that have been done and presented in conjunction with the Shoreline Arts Alliance. I will pull up a link to that while we're on, and I'll put it in the chat box. They are all recorded, and it's the head of the Yale School of Public Health, Dr. Sten Vermund, who is talking with his colleagues, and one of his colleagues is like, her specialty is exchange of air and safety. So these are really worth listening to if you have questions in that regard.
So who knew that this would actually turn out to be a colleague circle about ventilation, but there are a bunch of follow-up questions here. Tracy is trying to figure out whether it's possible to use a basement office without windows to potentially house more than one staff person, either on a staggered schedule or with an air purifier, if there are ways around that, because it sounds like she's working with some space constraints at her organization.
Hi, Tracy. I think you could. I would not do that myself. I think that would be a dicey decision. So if you wanted to use a downstairs office with no obvious means of ventilation, I would let only one person use it.
There's also, I'm not sure if it was more a question or a comment from Melissa at Lockwood Matthews about, have you ever heard of using a UV light through the HVAC system?
So yeah, so they talk a lot about using the use of UV lights in your HVAC system. Your HVAC system has got to be able to handle that. So that's one thing. I'm not a specialist about it, but I would go listen to those Shoreline Arts recordings. I know Amherst has been on them, and I think some of you all have been on them. What I would tell you though is get real information from a really good source and not someone who sells UV lights to install in your HVAC system. Because it's not just like throw a UV light in your HVAC system. It is more complicated than that. And that is as much as I know about it. So yes, and there are resources for it. There is an association, an online association of HVAC professionals who are having this conversation about HVAC and COVID and how to make HVAC systems more COVID or prevent the spread of COVID. I can't even think of how to say that. So I cannot remember the name of that association. I know they talk about it in the Shorelines, but the Shoreline Arts Alliance also has a bunch of resources that are resources from those talks, and those are online. So you might be able to just scroll through the resources and find that.
Thank you so much, Liz. So there's a question from Patty about contact tracing and whether they should be asking for contact information from their visitors in the event that someone has been exposed to the virus. You know, that may be a question for you, Liz, but I'd also be interested to hear from our other panelists about what they're doing with respect to gathering information from visitors, because I know that gathering staff information and timing is in the state guidelines.
So
yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, so what we're doing is when people register to buy tickets, we ask them to confirm the full name of everyone in their party and an email or a phone number for each individual. And then when they arrive, we check to make sure that those people that we already have in that registration are the actual people coming into the building. If they're not, if there's been a change, we get their full name and an email or phone number or that person. When like workmen come to the building, they have to give us an email or phone number and their full name as well. So we're keeping a log of every single person who walks through the door, no matter how long they're in the building. Like if a UPS guy comes in, he has to give us his email or phone number and his full name as well for the log. So nobody comes into the building that doesn't log in into our log, so that we have that information in case we get word from somebody that one of those people had some issue.
We did at our events. We had everyone who walks in through the gate has to sign their name, phone number, email, some means of contact, and then we know the staff that's there and the reenactors, so we have their contact information also.
We went to the local health district for information about what we should be doing about preparing for contact tracing. And we were actually told that we probably didn't need to And we decided that we were going to do so anyway. And so we're doing building logs. We usually have to fill them out for people ourselves because our board members and other folks are not really good about remembering, even when we put it right in front of them. But right now, we've been advised that Connecticut isn't at a point where they would use the information that we're collecting. So I'm not sure that that's true, and we've decided to ignore it.
So that is true. Connecticut is sort of a catch-22 about how they would use the information. They are trying to upgrade their system. You are not required to collect that information, but you may choose to do that. And I think how Bob suggested, as part of, if you're doing online ticketing, or even if you're having people call for a reservation, it makes a lot of sense to get their name, right? And at least their phone number and their email. And then there you have it. You have, if they've checked in, you have a contact trace record.
Bob, can I ask quickly how you're managing that log? Is it a giant spreadsheet? Is there some software that you're using to manage the log?
It's just Excel because it's by day, and so it isn't too onerous at this point because of the limited number of people who are actually entering the building. But we can export from our point of sale system the names and information that we're requiring them to put in when they register.
Great. And thanks for those links, everybody, around the webinars and also resources related to HVAC. Is there anyone in the meeting who wants to share a little bit about what's going on at your organization or get some advice? I mean, we have 43 people here who presumably have some interest in what's going on around reopening around the state. Either you're here because you're interested in learning what other people are doing, you have some questions, you're trying to think through an issue. I'd love to make this useful for everyone here. So please consider this a forum for sharing any questions that you're struggling with. Or experiences that you've had so far that you think might be useful. Go ahead, Bob.
So I'd like to hear what other people are thinking, because a large part of our focus right now is school tours and how we might be able to provide school tours and actually getting buy-in from our superintendent and mayor for the school tours. We're having a modicum of success with what we've proposed, but I'd love to hear what other people are doing or thinking about with school tours.
I can talk about that at Old Newgate Prison. So for those of you who know me, I have 4 museums under my belt, and one of them is Old Newgate Prison and Copper Mine. None of my museums are open. 2 of them will not reopen this year, and that's the Prudence Crandall Museum and the Henry Whitfield Museum in Guilford. We've decided that those historic buildings just do not lend themselves to reopening, and so Prudence Crandall was going to be closed anyway for restoration, and Henry Whitfield, we're going to take on some projects during the season, which we wouldn't normally get to, and that we just don't see a benefit. There's not a big enough benefit to reopening for us at the Henry Whitfield Museum. Now, Old Newgate Prison and the Eric Sloan Museum have wide open spaces, outdoor spaces, and also fairly large indoor spaces where it would be easier to reopen. What I can tell you is that in terms of talking to teachers, is they are like freaking out right now. So having conversations with even teachers that you know and you regularly work with has been challenging, because our experience is like, they're like, yes, we want to, but we can't talk about it now because we have no idea, we're getting mixed messages. So that's been our experience. What we have done though, is we have never, at Old Newgate Prison, had never done virtual field trips. And we now, even though we use Teams for the state, Teams is not the best to deal with classrooms. We got permission, which was not easy, to purchase the highest level Zoom account, which is like Zoom Webinar Super Special Zoom. And it's like $585 a year, so it's not cheap. But it allows you to divide up into classrooms and to do online registration and to do a lot of things that you cannot do in regular Zoom or even a basic subscription of Zoom. Morgan Bengal, who's on the line, and actually, Morgan, you should talk about this. You're here. Morgan, I'm shutting up. You talk. Go. I hope she's there. I saw her there before.
I see her on the list.
I'm here.
Morgan,
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you talk about a little bit about your online field trips?
Yeah. So, right. I don't know about the video, but okay. Here we are. So for the field trip, Liz, we did, well, teachers in the beginning this past, spring as they were closing up, they really wanted us to join in on their Google, what they've been using, right? So Google Classroom. So I just joined into classes and I did it a couple times. One was 3 different classes. And we just took them on our virtual tours that we have of the mine and added in some educational components with a lot of questions. And the students got a lot out of it and they, got to learn a lot, but then they are also really eager to come when we do open. So we were able to give them the students free passes for when we are able to reopen. And then another group I did, they decided to just rush it. And so they had, over 100 students on one platform. And so that wasn't quite as dialogue based, but I was able to give them the virtual tours. And they really were really pleased with how it turned out. And it was kind of just a fun thing for them to do. As they were ending up. So that's kind of what we did. So I don't know. And we charged $50 per session. So for the one group that we did 3 sessions, we got $50, and then the other one we just did $50, just kind of as a donation. But we're looking forward to revamping it and using our Zoom webinar in the fall and having a more streamlined approach.
Great, thank you so much, Morgan. T-Lock says, we're hoping to do virtual field trips this coming school year, but are still in the early stages. Does anyone else have anything they want to share around school groups? I see we have Rob Krett from Connecticut Historical Society here. Do you want to say a little bit about what you guys are thinking around school tours, since I'm sure that's an important component of what you do?
Sure. Like a lot of organizations, we've been really focused on making a safe environment for staff and eventually for visitors. We normally get somewhere between 10 and 15,000 school kids, K-12, from across the state, both here and with outreach. We're anticipating that that's going to be practically non-existent for 2020 and maybe even 2021. We received a NEH CARES grant that'll help us to develop online programming. So we've been rushing as much as we can to move a lot of our efforts online and through distance learning in public programs as well as K-12. We did a survey at the end of the school year with a lot of the teachers that had been accustomed to working with us, and they did express a level of interest, but also a lot of concern that they weren't sure what the administration was going to decide or how they were going to approach things. So our sense is that we have put a lot of exhibitions and programs online. We'll continue to do that. I think that post-COVID, whenever that might be, there will still be a little bit of a hybrid of in-person, hopefully, as well as broadcasting some things with educators as well as with people. We use Zoom, we've used Crowdcast, we're using other forms of distance learning with some of the education efforts. And so I think that the teachers, as Liz said, have a lot on their plate to sort out what's going to happen in this next school year. And I don't think that there's anything that's been set in concrete about how that's going to be approached. And so we're sort of planning for worst case scenario that there'll be no school groups coming to CHS in the next year or so. And if they do, great. And if things get better and we can accommodate that, fantastic. So we're trying to put some virtual tools in place where we can hopefully accommodate some of the needs and reach out with programs and exhibitions and those kinds of things.
Great, thanks, Rob. I also see Diane Gellerette from Norwalk is here on the call. I know you folks in Norwalk have had a lot of success working with the schools. Do you have anything you'd like to say on this point?
Hi. We went to Zoom classrooms when we couldn't have anybody on site because everything had shut down, and the third grade teachers were ecstatic that we could actually offer something online. So we've actually finished our season. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is evaluating how we can actually expand the virtual programming for next year, because we just don't see this going away anytime soon. So so this is the new way of new normal for all of us.
Great, thank you. It looks like Janice has her hand up. Would you like to share a little bit about what you folks are doing? Can you unmute yourself?
I'm from the Wittenberry Historical Society. Sorry about that. And I think Diana, who is also with our organization, would like to ask a couple of questions, but I'm not sure that she knows how to raise the hand. We're all pretty new to Zoom. Diana? I think she just muted herself.
Hi, Diana Barnard, also from the Wittenberry Historical Society. I would say that we perhaps are doing things backwards. Our board in an unofficial meeting elected to have our research center open May to October, and we are scrambling now to put protocols in place. My basic question at this point is, can anyone recommend a disinfectant in a building where researchers and volunteers meet, as well as collections are held?
So Diana and Janice, have you gone through the DECD guidelines for the reopening certification process? That's
Yes.
something, okay. So that's something you'll need to do. Obviously you've done that. So what kind of in terms of a disinfectant, for what use do you mean?
What surfaces are you dealing with?
Principally non-collection surfaces, work tables, display cases, doors, light
Okay.
switches.
So for those things that are non-historic, you would use the cleaners that are on the CDC website. So there's a whole list of approved cleaners for not. Oh, there you go, Rob Brett. He's sharing his Clorox wipes. You can go over to his house if you need to, but just wear a mask. So so there's actually quite a number of cleaners that are appropriate. Donna, did you want to add something to that?
When you're dealing with your historic materials, you do it the other way around. You're not going to clean anything afterwards. You're going to provide anyone who's working there with the appropriate nitrile gloves for handling artifacts. And they're not quite as specialized as the conservation supply houses would have you think, but you want something that's relatively tight-fitting and highly flexible. And people wear them whenever they're handling anything that you're taking out of your archival storage. With their masks on, you should not have a need, at least that's what we're being told, to do anything to your collections. So for modern surfaces, you're cleaning them after use, and for historic materials, you simply isolate them from direct contact. And if you've got things you're really concerned about, then invest in some of the plastic face shields so that you further separate original materials from the researchers using them.
Right. For items in archives, if you have researchers that are coming in and and they absolutely need to have access to original archival materials, even if you don't have everything in your collection in Mylar sheaths or any other kind of sheets, you can always just sheath them for use and then unsheath them afterwards. And do remember, for historic services, depending on how often you're open, right? So some of us are small and we're not open that frequently. If there's time between when these items are going to be touched again, the virus only lives on surfaces for a certain amount of time. And I don't want to say anything because I'm not sure what the most up-to-date information is, but it is limited on surfaces. And so that's something that, thank goodness, because that gives us a little bit of a pass on some of our most, historic items.
And if your researcher can work with surrogates rather than original materials, you can think about scanning things and letting them look at the scans. You can photocopy, you can photograph. For many purposes, they may not actually physically need to handle the original at all.
Hi, this is Lizette Pelletier from the State Archives. I just want to jump in a little bit. We aren't open to researchers yet, but what we will be doing is, first of all, we're focusing on not having people come in unless they absolutely need to. So if people contact us, the reference staff will be doing a thorough reference interview, and just as Donna said, providing surrogates when possible, so that they don't have to come in. So photocopies, digital images, that sort of thing. We've the Realm study that's been going on with I forget which group, Battelle, and I forget who the other group is. They're saying 72 hours for things that should be quarantined. But again, that's all depend on if it's really popular items. So we're going to be holding stuff aside for 72 hours, depending on what the item is. As far as cleaning things, we're going to focus on people who do come in and handle things. Hand washing will be more important than gloves, and definitely not hand sanitizers, because the chemicals in the hand sanitizers can damage items that people are handling. If they wash and dry their hands well, that should take care of the problem. The other thing we're concerned about with gloves is that it changes your tactile perception. And if you're handling something that's a little bit on the fragile side, you could damage it. So except for photographs, which should have gloves used, we're not going to require people use gloves. And just for that reason. The other thing is, I was on a call yesterday with other state archives and people from the National Archives. The National Archives is recommending that wood furniture be cleaned with a mixture of 70% isopropyl alcohol to 30% water, as being better than some of the other chemicals for wood. And then a couple of other people who've been doing that said they follow up with furniture polish, especially if you have something, a wooden table that you want to preserve, that after you've sprayed the mixture on and it's dried, then follow up with furniture polish just to help preserve the finish. And I think that's all I wanted to add.
Thanks, Lizette. Oh, Cam, go ahead.
A follow-up question, if you don't mind. What are you doing with the state archives in terms of plexiglass for individual researchers? Are you setting up workstations with plexiglass?
No, because our reading room is fairly big. We're one person per table, which will be more than 6 feet apart. So we've removed all the chairs in the reading rooms except for one at each one of the large reading tables we have. Part of the thing that's holding up reopening is the plexiglass to put on the reference desks to separate the staff from people coming in and asking questions at the reference desk. But no, we're not going to segregate people individually using plexiglass because we have enough space where we can spread people out.
Well, this actually is on point to a question that Sean raised earlier about what people are thinking about in terms of reopening their reading rooms. We're already discussing this a little bit, but I wondered if anyone else had advice to share. Or Sean, if you have a more particular question that you'd like to ask, feel free to go ahead. Cam.
I have a question about what kind of furniture polish.
Oh.
Oh, they didn't say what it was. I would assume Pledge works just as well as anything. It was no brand was specified.
Don't use Pledge on anything.
Okay.
No, please don't.
Never, 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 never.
Oh my.
At least if you're talking about collections furniture, Renaissance wax has been the recommended standard for a number of years. If you're talking about modern office furniture, I don't think the Pledge is as bad as Liz does, but.
No, they were talking about their research tables.
Right.
Right, yes.
Okay.
Research
Okay.
tables, any good modern thing you'd use on your furniture at home that's not antique, but
Yeah.
I don't use Pledge.
Okay.
It's okay, Liz, stop making faces at me.
You weren't doing antique furniture. Okay.
Alexia has also had her hand up for a while. Go ahead.
Actually, I had a couple different things, but so I'm Alexia. I'm from the Amity and Woodbridge Historical Society, but I was going to speak to the cleaning and other things because my day job is that I'm a research scientist at Yale. So I think, as Lizette said, the best thing to do is not to clean, it's to really to quarantine things for 72 hours. I think it's a mistake to worry about trying to clean stuff. Just don't let anybody else touch it. I mean, for any, and archival stuff, if somebody's got to wait 3 days because somebody else used that particular material, that's what I would do. For the tables, again, I think they're cheap. Buy some plastic tablecloths. You can clean those however you want, but you can also remove them and take them out of circulation and put them back on the table 3 days later, and you don't even have to worry about cleaning them. So relying on how well something is cleaned is riskier than doing the 72 hours and then not worrying about it. So, and I wouldn't, for any collections, I wouldn't clean any collections. Just don't let anybody else touch it for 72 hours and you don't have an issue. For the student, we've already been told in Woodbridge, we don't do lots of kids, but they've already told us there's no way they're coming. Whether we can do a virtual thing or not, I don't know, but we were told already a while ago, because one of our board members is on the Board of Education, that don't even think about it. So I think that's going to be, for most schools, probably the case. Even the idea that they've got to put them all on a bus again just to get them to wherever their field trip is, they're going to have problems with that. So I think I would count on virtual field trips, not even outdoor stuff. The question, though, that I had, and I think, Liz, you sort of spoke to this, is, we have a historic house museum that is not set up with displays, but meant to be like a sort of an immersive experience. We are not open on a regular basis. We normally do events and like hearth cooking events, and obviously there's just no way. I'm trying to figure out if we're being smart, if we're being lazy and not creative about thinking about a way to open the museums. I mean, if you've truly got a historic house museum where you can't put up plexiglass and the goal is for people really just to walk through and you have to kind of give them tours, because we don't have a bunch of placards and other signage, because the idea is to have it look like an old house, and then those things kind of interfere with that sort of immersive experience. Does it even make sense to try? Should we even try to come up with something, or should we not even try, because the smartest thing to do is not? What we've been doing in the meantime is doing tons of work on our archives and other things with a few volunteers in our board. So that's my question. Should we even try?
So I think that is the $100,000 question for everybody, right? And I just had a conversation 2 or 3 weeks ago with the children's museums in Connecticut. And you can imagine if you're a children's museum, every single thing you do, you're being told is bad, right? And if you're a museum in general, every single thing that I've been told since I started working in museums, like be interactive, engage people, give them things to touch, make it so it's not a boring museum experience, right? 30 years of hearing that's all bad now. So, so we're really being challenged in a way that we haven't before. And I think, so one of the director of the Children's Museum in Middletown, which is a very major space and is really a big tourist destination, and also serves the community, said, I've been thinking and thinking about this, and I've been weighing this decision, and I keep thinking, do children need to come to my museum now versus how safe do I feel having them and their parents there? And she has decided that this year she does not feel that decision weighs in terms of opening. She feels like families and children have enough other options and they're stressed enough, and now that the weather is good, right, for a while, in theory they can be outside until October, November. She's like, I don't feel that it's worth it to open. So I don't think so I'm saying not a wrong or a right answer. I'll go back to what I said. I made the call to close the Henry Whitfield Museum. There's things that staff can be doing that we've had on our on our to-do list for years and years, and we haven't gotten done. And I just don't think the public is going to miss so much by not being able to access the Henry Whitfield Museum for a certain amount of time as it is the public safety, concerns. So I don't want to be part of the problem. Like I'm just not willing to do it there. And I'm very hesitant about my other museums for exactly the same reason. So I would say Brianne Greenfield's not on the call today. She's the director of the Harriet Beecher Stowe House. She made an incredibly brave decision. I think 4 weeks into this, we will not reopen in 2020. And I had to hand it to her because there's no one else who was out there that early making that decision. So.
Thank you. It's a tough call for all of us, as I think your comments really underscore. We just had a couple more questions. Diane was asking if anyone has explored sort of touchless options to the traditional visitors sign-in or guest book. What are people doing around that?
Around what?
A guest book, the visitor's book. If you're having people sign in, are you doing it in a contactless way? Are there other ways that that you're managing a visitor log for those of you?
Yeah, we have a lot of pens, and every person gets to use a different pen, and we wipe them down in between.
They check in electronically beforehand, and our visitor services person makes any changes that are needed. So the visitor's not touching anything while they're here. But I did just go look on QR codes. So they'd actually have to download a QR code, and then you have to have a QR code reader at your place for them to put their phone or thing underneath of it. So it's touchless. So I don't know that I'm going to go there. Maybe we're changing our point of sale system, so our new one might have something like that, like scan a pre-purchase ticket or something.
And I know we're getting sort of to the end of our time here, but Susie at Lockwood Matthews has sort of raised the question about liability, whether people are doing a sort of release. I don't know if anyone else has. Liz points out that hold harmless consent forms don't protect you from legal action. But if anyone else has anything they want to say on how they may be managing expectations around liability, which sounds like that's what at least as much of what a consent form is sort of about, I'd be happy to open things up for that.
Amherst, I know we're running out of time, but I had a comment about some of the other questions in terms of audience. And two things I just posted in the chat, a study that was done in May that looked at audiences of cultural organizations across the country. There were about 120,000 respondents that participated with that survey. And in talking to colleagues around the country, those that have reopened are experiencing visitation in the 10 to 25% range of what they experienced in the same time last year. So just helpful, I think, to keep an eye on expectations, and that study takes a look at expectations of cultural consumers from across the country. That is a little disconcerting. It'll take a while for people to be comfortable to want to participate live, and I think hearing from some other colleagues about the low level of participation, again, that sort of helped me to think more about what we can do virtually and how do we begin to measure our success as an organization. It's not the traditional tickets sold or retail sales, those kinds of things, but I think it's going to have to be, what's that virtual experience like, and are we doing things that are meaningful and relevant to the audience and virtually, and then how do we measure that? So I think those are some of the questions that we're sort of struggling with and trying to tackle here.
Great, thank you, Rob. And I want to, we're sort of 5 minutes over time here, so I just want to thank everyone for participating, and a special thanks to Liz, Bob, Cam, and Donna for sharing their experiences and addressing some of our questions more directly. Thanks to all those of you who shared your experiences as well. We hope to see you again at another CLHO event. And I just want to give you a quick preview. We have another special edition colleague circle coming up a week from today, talking about Connecticut organizations that are having success interpreting African American history, something that is probably on many of our minds right now. So look for publicity around that next week, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.